I smiled when James told me he was leaving for Houston, but something inside me had already gone quiet long before that moment. I said I was proud of him, and my voice didn't shake, which almost scared me more than anything else. I had practiced that sentence in my head for days, maybe weeks, without even realizing it. Because the truth is, I had stopped reacting the way a wife should react. I had stopped asking questions that deserved answers. I had stopped fighting for something that felt like it was slowly slipping through my hands. My name is Sarah, and I am 32 years old, and for a long time, I believed silence meant peace. I believed that if nothing was openly broken, then nothing was truly wrong. But silence can be louder than shouting if you listen closely enough. And I had been listening for a long time. I just didn't want to admit what I was hearing. I lived in Seattle with James for 6 years, and on the outside, we looked like a perfect couple. But perfection can be a very quiet kind of loneliness, and loneliness can live right next to you without making a sound. That's the part no one tells you. I met James when I still believed love was something you could build like a house, brick by brick, day by day. He was calm, confident, and steady in a way that made me feel safe at first. I liked that he didn't rush into things, that he thought before he spoke, that he didn't waste words. I thought that meant he valued them. We met at a small party in Seattle, and he stood out because he wasn't trying to stand out. He listened more than he talked, and when he did speak, people paid attention, including me. We started dating slowly, almost carefully, like we were both afraid to break something fragile. But nothing felt fragile back then. It felt strong, intentional, real. When he proposed, it wasn't dramatic or loud, just simple and certain, like everything else about him. I said yes without hesitation because I believed in the version of him I had come to know. And maybe more than that, I believed in the version of myself I was when I was with him. I was softer then, more hopeful, less afraid of what I couldn't see. Our marriage didn't fall apart all at once. It faded slowly, like a photograph left in the sun too long. At first, it was small things I could easily explain away. He worked longer hours, said his projects were demanding more from him. I understood that because my job as a nurse in downtown Seattle was demanding too. I told myself this was what adulthood looked like. Two people chasing stability, sacrificing time, building something together. But somewhere in that process, we stopped building together. We just started existing side by side. We still ate dinner at the same table, still slept in the same bed, but it felt like there was a wall growing between us. A quiet, invisible wall. I would talk about my day and he would nod, but his eyes were somewhere else. I noticed it, but I didn't push. I didn't want to be the kind of wife who complained, so I stayed quiet. And in that silence, something important began to disappear. There was a night I remember clearly, not because anything dramatic happened, but because of how normal it felt on the surface. I came home late from a shift, exhausted and emotionally drained. James was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up when I walked in. I sat next to him and rested my head against his shoulder, something I used to do without thinking. But this time, it felt different. His body didn't respond. He didn't lean into me. He didn't move away either. He just stayed still, and in that stillness, I felt like a stranger. I pulled away slowly and told myself I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Not in him, in us. And once you feel that shift, you can't unfeel it. You can pretend, you can ignore it, but it stays there, waiting. After that, I started noticing more things that didn't quite fit but weren't obvious enough to confront. James became more protective of his time, more structured in ways that didn't include me anymore. He had meetings I didn't hear about until after they happened, trips that felt too frequent, too convenient. He started carrying his phone everywhere, even into rooms where it didn't make sense. I told myself it was work pressure, that I was being unfair by questioning him. I didn't want to become suspicious without reason, but suspicion doesn't always need proof. Sometimes it grows from patterns you can't ignore. I began to feel like I was living in a version of my life that didn't fully belong to me anymore, like I was watching it from the outside, and that feeling stayed with me longer than anything else. I didn't confront him, not because I was weak, but because I wasn't ready to hear the answer. Instead, I started changing in small ways. I focused more on my work, took extra shifts, stayed busy so I wouldn't have to sit with my thoughts. I stopped asking where he was going or when he would be back. I stopped expecting him to notice when I was tired or overwhelmed. I became more independent, but not in a healthy way. It was more like I was preparing myself for something I couldn't fully name yet. I didn't talk to anyone about it, not even my sister Dana. I kept it inside, like a secret I was protecting, even though it was hurting me. And the strange part is, James didn't seem to notice the change in me either. It was like we were both slowly stepping away from each other without saying a word. The first time Houston came into our lives, it didn't feel like a turning point. It felt like just another piece of his work. He mentioned it casually, like it wasn't a big deal, like it was just another project. But something about the way he said it stayed with me. There was a distance in his voice, a kind of carefulness I had started to recognize. He didn't ask what I thought about it. He didn't include me in the decision. He just informed me, and I accepted it because that had become our pattern. But that night, I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand why something so small felt so heavy. I told myself it was just fear of change, but it wasn't. It was something deeper, something I didn't want to name yet. Days passed, and the idea of Houston became more real. James started preparing quietly, organizing things, making calls, setting plans. He seemed focused, almost relieved in a way I couldn't explain. I watched him move through the house like someone already halfway gone. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for months. What if he already left, just not physically? That thought stayed with me. It followed me to work, sat with me during my breaks, echoed in my mind when everything else was quiet. I didn't have proof of anything, but I had a feeling. And sometimes a feeling is enough to change everything. One evening, I was sitting alone in our kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold, when I realized something important. I wasn't scared of losing James anymore. I was scared of losing myself completely if I stayed in this place any longer. That realization didn't come with tears. It came with a strange kind of calm, the kind that makes you sit up a little straighter, the kind that makes you think clearly for the first time in a long time. I started asking myself questions I had avoided before, questions about what I deserved, what I wanted, what I was willing to accept. And the answers weren't easy, but they were honest. And honesty can be painful when you've been lying to yourself for too long. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. I didn't have a plan or a timeline, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep smiling through conversations that felt empty. I couldn't keep living in a marriage that felt like a performance. That night, I made a quiet decision. Not out loud, not dramatically, just inside myself. I decided I was going to start paying attention to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made me. And once you make that kind of decision, things begin to change in ways you don't expect, because the truth has a way of showing up when you finally stop looking away. And I had just stopped looking away. The next morning, I woke up feeling different, like something inside me had shifted into place overnight. It wasn't confidence and it wasn't strength. Not yet. It was awareness, sharp and uncomfortable, like opening your eyes in a room that had always been dark. I went to work like I always did, moving through patients, conversations, responsibilities, but my mind kept returning to one thought. I needed to stop guessing and start knowing. That idea followed me all day, pressing against me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. When I got home, James was in the shower, and his phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, face up for once. I froze when I saw it, my heart beating louder than it should have. I had never checked his phone before, not once in 6 years, but that moment didn't feel like breaking trust. It felt like confirming reality. My hands trembled as I picked it up, and for a second, I almost put it back. But then I remembered the silence, the distance, the feeling of disappearing, and I unlocked it. What I found wasn't loud or dramatic, which somehow made it worse. There were no obvious messages, no clear evidence of betrayal, but there was a pattern, a subtle one, hidden in plain sight. A contact saved under a simple name, repeated calls at odd hours, messages that had been deleted but still left traces in the notification history. It wasn't proof, not in the way people expect proof to be, but it was enough. Enough to make my chest tighten, enough to make my stomach drop. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stood there, holding his phone, feeling something inside me quietly break, not all at once, not violently, just slowly, like something finally giving up. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and stepped away like nothing had happened. Because in that moment, I understood something clearly. The truth doesn't always need to be loud to be real. Sometimes it just needs to be seen. That night, I didn't look at James the same way. I listened to him talk about his plans, about Houston, about work, and every word felt like it had another meaning underneath it. I nodded at the right moments, responded when needed, but inside, I was somewhere else entirely. I was replaying everything, every moment, every change, every instinct I had ignored. And for the first time, I wasn't blaming myself for it. I wasn't asking what I had done wrong or what I could fix. I was just observing, quietly, carefully. And that shift changed everything. Because once you stop trying to fix something that's already broken, you start thinking about what comes next. And I had never allowed myself to think that far before. But now, I couldn't stop. A few days later, something unexpected happened that I didn't see coming. I ran into Dana at a coffee shop near the hospital, completely by accident. She looked at me for 2 seconds before asking what was wrong. I tried to brush it off, tried to smile, but she didn't let me. She never did. We sat down, and for the first time, I told someone the truth. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough. Enough for her to understand that something wasn't right. She listened quietly, without interrupting, without judging. And then she said something that stayed with me. You already know the answer. You're just afraid of what it means. I didn't respond because she was right. I was afraid. Not of losing James, but of what my life would look like without him, of starting over, of being alone. But for the first time, I realized something else too. Staying felt lonelier than leaving ever could. That conversation with Dana opened something in me I couldn't close again. I went home that evening and sat in the same kitchen where I had made my quiet decision days earlier. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was clear. I started writing things down, not because I had a plan, but because I needed to see my thoughts outside my head. I wrote about what I felt, what I noticed, what I couldn't ignore anymore. And the more I wrote, the clearer it became. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. I was finally seeing the truth without trying to soften it. And that truth was simple. James was already gone, just not physically. And I was the only one still holding on to something that no longer existed. The breaking point didn't come from a big discovery. It came from something small, almost ordinary. It was 2 nights before James was supposed to leave for Houston. We were sitting at dinner, and he was talking about logistics, timelines, schedules. I was listening but not really hearing him. Then he said something that made everything stop. He said, "This is going to be a fresh start." And the way he said it wasn't about work. I felt it instantly. That sentence wasn't about his career, it was about his life. A life that didn't include me the way it used to. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I didn't recognize the man sitting across from me, and that realization hit me harder than anything else. Because it meant I had been loving someone who no longer existed. That night, I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. I sat on the floor of our bedroom after he fell asleep and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. Not just for the betrayal, not just for the distance, but for the years I had spent convincing myself everything was okay. I cried for the version of me who kept trying, who kept hoping, who kept believing. And then, slowly, the tears stopped, and something else took their place. Clarity. Painful, sharp clarity. I stood up, looked around the room, and realized I couldn't stay here anymore. Not like this. Not pretending. Not waiting for something that wasn't coming back. And in that moment, I made a real decision. Not quiet. Not hidden. Real. The next morning, I told James the truth. Not about what I knew, not about what I had seen, but about what I felt. I told him I wasn't happy. I told him I felt alone. I told him I couldn't continue like this. He looked at me like he hadn't expected it. Like I had stepped out of a role he thought I would always play. He tried to respond, tried to explain, but his words felt empty. And I realized something important in that moment. I didn't need an explanation anymore. I didn't need confirmation or confession. I already had what I needed, my truth, and that was enough. I told him I wasn't going to Houston. I told him I wasn't going to wait. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid saying those words. He left for Houston 2 days later. I didn't drive him to the airport. I didn't stand at the door and watch him go. I stayed in the kitchen, holding onto the edge of the counter, listening to the sound of the door closing behind him. And when it did, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not sadness, just space. Quiet, open space. It scared me at first because I wasn't used to it, but slowly it started to feel like something else, like possibility. The days that followed were not easy. There were moments when I missed him, moments when I questioned my decision, moments when the silence felt too loud again. But there were also moments of peace, small, quiet moments where I felt like myself again. And those moments mattered more than anything else. Weeks passed and I started rebuilding my life in ways I never thought I could. I focused on my work, on my growth, on the parts of myself I had ignored for too long. I reconnected with Dana, spent time laughing, talking, being present in a way I hadn't been in years. I started sleeping better, breathing easier, living more honestly. And then one evening, I got a call from James. His voice was different, softer, regretful. He told me he had made mistakes. He told me he missed me. He told me he wanted to fix things. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt that old pull, that old hope. But then I remembered everything. The silence, the distance, the truth. And I realized something clearly. Missing someone doesn't mean they belong in your life anymore. I told him I hoped he found what he was looking for. And I meant it. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of acceptance. Because I had found something too, myself. And that was something I wasn't willing to lose again. When I hung up the phone, I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. I just sat there, feeling a quiet kind of strength I had never known before. My story didn't end the way I thought it would. It didn't have a perfect resolution or a happy reunion, but it had something better. Truth, growth, and a future that finally felt like mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more emotional stories.